and that's it. And then if you want to follow up on it, you can check on your phone. This needs to be higher, but khair. All right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidil Anbiya wa Mursaleen Nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Is the receivers on for the mic? Okay. So today, inshallah, we're going to be talking about dhabt. We spent some time last week talking about dhabt and what that means and what that entails. And we said that when we talked about narrators and when we discuss narrators, there are two very important things that the narrator needs to have, or two very important conditions for a narration to be accepted. So what are those two? This is the second, so that's right. I'm already giving that answer away. Trustworthiness. Trustworthiness, right? So the first one is adala, and the second one is dhabt. What is the difference between the two? Okay, good, right? So that is the purpose behind them. But I'm saying, like, essentially, what is the difference between them?
That refers to the mental capacity to memorize.
Good. Sure. So accuracy, right? It's very important that there's a sense of accuracy that's there, and precision in terms of. And we said that memory is of two types. What are those two types of memory?
Written and.
Ahsant, good. Right, like just regular memory that we know, that if an individual has the ability to memorize, and then dhabt al-kitaba, right? So to make sure that when he records, his recording is precise. So here, we had gone through a lot of these definitions and what they mean, and how to deal with it. So we went through this as well. We talked about the difference between them. We had also talked about the different types of weakness. We had said that when it comes to dhabt, we have a certain category of people who change, right? So somebody who we call mukhtalit. What is mukhtalit? So somebody who changes, what does that mean?
Something might have happened during his lifetime.
Right, something happened in his lifetime. And sure, yeah, I mean, you could say some trauma happened, right? Something happened in his life. And because of that trauma, what happened to this narrator?
Either he stopped narrating or he was stopped by his information.
Right, so that's in some cases. In some cases, if he was stopped from narrating, right? And who are the group, or who did we say would stop a sheikh from narrating?
Family or students.
Either family or students, right? So these are the two groups of people that would stop him from narrating. Why would they do that?
His memory is not working good.
Okay.
It's not very accurate with his.
It's like to protect him, right? The idea is to protect him, and not just that. Like they understand that there's a sense of responsibility that's there. And I think we had, was this a class that we went off like on a side tangent, like on what happens with like elder mashayikh and how it's very important for even us. Like so, I know that not all of us come from families where the family is like either a scholar or clergy, but if a child starts seeing things from his sheikh or from his parent, and he starts seeing that like he's making mistakes, then he should do what?
Either you will stop him or.
Right, he should either stop him or he should try to scale him out of that work. And alhamdulillah, like I actually do know a family here that they did this with their father. They noticed their father getting old, they noticed him getting elderly, they noticed that he started forgetting things. So what did they do? They actually pulled him from the work, because it's very important for all of us, like even people who are in like religious positions, or somebody who's narrating hadith, for them to maintain their status, right? To maintain their honor. So when an individual, right, like they reach their peak, right? An individual reaches their peak, and they'll plateau, they'll even come down a little bit. It's at this point that an individual will want to remove themselves from the spotlight, and they'll remove themselves from attention. Why? Because an individual, when they choose to leave, you can still choose to leave in a state of honor. But if you're forced to leave, right, it's not as honorable. And the same thing would happen here. And we said that these are the four situations where the narration of somebody who's mukhtalit, or somebody who changes, would be accepted. So what he narrated before has changed. How do I know that? What are some things I would look for to help me determine that? So in the hadith that you guys have heard, have any of you heard that, and he said this before he changed? So how do I know? Okay, so I can do something that's called sabr ala riwayati, where I can actually start comparing all of his narrations. What else can I do? Something a little bit easier, right? That's a lot of, that's very intensive. What about the chain? What is the chain going to tell me? The date? No, that's what I'm saying. How do I know? So there's a point, right? His memory is good. Something happens, and he starts forgetting, and he starts making mistakes. How can I, this point, how do I differentiate between the hadith? This group of people exists. Like, how many of us know somebody who suffered from dementia? Or how many of us know someone who suffered from like a mental breakdown, right? These things happen, right? These are very natural things. So the question comes like, okay, at what point, and we all know the point where the dementia sets in to be like, okay, this person can't function in society anymore, right? Like sometimes there's lighter stages of it, sometimes there's more difficult stages of it. So now, at what point how do I determine that? Even if I find out the date, like it was on this date that he changed. Does that help me with his narrations? Not really. So what is it? And have you guys ever seen like the dates next to the hadith? Like in this hadith was narrated on this date? No, it's not there. It doesn't exist. So what can I look for? And you guys have seen asanid. Like for those of you who attend the Sahih Muslim class, or those of you who have read a hadith before, like you know what a chain of narration looks like. How can I tell? What can I do? I can look at his students. Yes? How does that help me? Are there students who would have studied with him at this point? And then there are people who would have narrated from him afterward. And you would also have the students that continued with him and they started seeing him change. Some of them would realize it in what? They would stop narrating from him. And again, these are all very natural processes. What is the easiest way to do it? I would start looking at all of these students. And I'd be like, this is what you find in the books of hadith. If he narrates on so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, then you know that the hadith is sound. But if he narrates on these 3 or 4 students that came later, then those are the hadith that you want to doubt. So this is actually the main way it was determined.
So you look at his students,
you would look at his students, you would study his biography, and you'd be like, okay, when did these students sit with him? And you'll find in the biography that he sat with him before he changed. And you have clear like biographical data that tells us that. Corroborate reports. What does that mean?
Like there are other narrations saying the same thing.
Sure. If I find other narrations saying the same thing, so that is a means for me to strengthen that report. The next one, if the change is slight. If the change is slight. What does that mean? Meaning that sometimes the scholars of Jarh wa Ta'dil, they would say اختلط في آخر حياتي, that he changed at the end of his life. But what do they mean by change? He changed a little bit. Like he started losing his memory toward the end of his life. But his memory was still what? It was still good. It was still relatively strong. It was still pretty good. But you would still describe him with this term, right? You would still use this term mukhtalit. And lastly, if he has stopped from narrating, so if an individual, like he's narrating, and he stopped, his parent, like his family or his students stop him, why do we accept his narrations?
We accept up to the point that he stopped. Yeah.
Okay. Well, not just that. If he stopped, is he narrating anymore?
No.
So if I find his narrations, is there any reason for me to reject them? No, but he would still be described as what? As mukhtalit. Okay? So these are the 4. All other situations are rejected, but I would say conceptually, these are the only 4 situations that would actually apply. Like these are the 4 conceptual situations where an exception can be made for the acceptance of narrations. We said that there are different types of dhabt, and you guys had mentioned them, right? There's written dhabt and there's actual memory. Narrating and meaning. So we said that this is number 1 jais, it's permissible for a narrator to narrate something from the Prophet ﷺ, not in wording, but in ma'na. This is by ijma' al-Muḥaddithīn. Like, so all of the Muḥaddithīn are agreed that this is permissible to do so, and we had mentioned a few situations where it would not be. So what are some situations where I would have to relay the prophetic wording? Do you guys remember? Yes, like there has to be. There's no way that these are narrated in meaning. Ad-du'a, ahsant, good. What else? Dhikr, good. What else? There are two more we had mentioned last time. Who remembers? I want you guys to think about it. All right, here, conceptually, do you think I can narrate one of Allah's name in meaning? No. It would have to be divinely inspired. Okay, what else? And the last one you guys probably didn't remember, but this is something that we call a jawami al-kalim. So if the Prophet ﷺ said something that is encompassing and small in meaning, then that statement would have to be narrated as is. So for example, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, ad-din al-nasiha. He said that the religion is sincere advice. If I change the wording in there, I can relay a little bit of the same meaning, but will it be as encompassing as that wording? No. Or the Prophet ﷺ, he said, al-hajj arafah, right? He said that the hajj is arafah. Can I change that to mean something else? Or if dua ibadah. When the Prophet ﷺ, he said that dua is worship, right? Or the essence of worship is dua, or mukh al-ibadah, right? So you have, they're so small that it's not possible to actually change the wording, to change the meaning of those and replace them with synonyms or use other words. So narrating from written works, we said that there are three conditions for this. Yes?
For narrating in meaning, can they say Qala Rasulullah, or they have to say Qala?
No, they can say Qala Rasulullah. Like, so why do we do it? Because the books have already been preserved, right? And we say like, okay, or it's something like this. Saying that does have an effect on rulings. So if I said to you, the Prophet ﷺ said that you cannot wear silk. And if I have another hadith that the Prophet ﷺ forbade us from sitting on graves. What is the difference between these two? I'll say it again. The Prophet ﷺ said that it is not permissible, or a man cannot wear silk. In the second hadith I have, the Prophet ﷺ forbade us from sitting on graves. Close. Ahsant. No. The first one is a statement of the Prophet ﷺ, and the second one was what? The meaning was being relayed. How does this impact rulings? What is the ruling on men wearing silk? It's what? It's haram. It's impermissible. What is the ruling of sitting on graves? Graves. Yes. Makruh. Do you see how the ruling changed? Because of how something was relayed? If something is relayed in prophetic wording, then it is okay for me to take what? I can take a ruling of haram, or I can take an obligation from it. But if I have something relayed in meaning, then what do? It would actually lower that ruling. It would no longer be an obligation, it would be what? It would be recommended, right? Or it would be no longer be a prohibition, it would be disliked. It's generally across the board. Unless you have something specific. So for example, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli." He says, pray as you have seen me praying. And all of the things, you have many of the companions, they narrated like, and we saw him do this, and we saw him do that, right? They're just narrating the meaning of what they saw. But because you have that command already in place, that we have to pray as we see him pray, what does that mean? That this is the structure I need to follow. Right? I can't come and be like, okay, I can add a rak'ah, or like, okay, no, let me add 0.5% to zakat, right? Those things are very clearly structured. And those things that are clearly structured are the Prophet ﷺ, he says, "Khudhu anni manasikakum." He said, take from me the rites of Hajj. But the rites of Hajj, how are they related to us? Same thing, through meaning, right? It was through meaning. It's not like they don't have a single hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he sat down and he's like, okay, Hajj is like this. You have to go to Arafah and you have to sit there at this time and you leave at this time and you pray at this time and then you go to Muzdalifah and then you do a minute, right? We don't have in one hadith the Prophet ﷺ statements concerning us on how to deal with those things. So does it apply to everything? No, only to those things that kind of are standalone. But if you already have like an umbrella ruling for certain things like Hajj and what example did I give? Praying, right? So if we already have like an umbrella ruling for those things, then at that point, then I would take all of those as wujub. Like I would take those things as obligations. Like the Prophet ﷺ, I saw the Prophet ﷺ making ruku'. Can I be like, well, he's narrating in meaning, therefore ruku' is recommended? Right? That doesn't work, right? It wouldn't work in those situations. Why? Because I already have an umbrella ruling saying that anything that you see me doing is going to be an obligation at that point. Yes?
So if I read a random hadith, how do I tell if it's a meaning or not?
By studying Islam first, right? So that would that would be step one. And we had this conversation before, right? So what would be the purpose of a layperson engaging with the hadith? If a layperson opened up Bukhari, if a layperson opened up Muslim or Sunan Abi Dawud, I'm sorry, for barakah. Why? Because I want to be in the presence of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I want to take his words, right? I want to take blessing from them. What am I not allowed to do? I'm not allowed to extract rulings, right? Why am I not allowed to extract rulings? Because there are certain usul that I've taught, right? Like to you guys, it doesn't mean that we can just start going around and like start willy-nilly throwing darts and like be like, oh, well, you know, the Shaykh said al-amr yufid al-wujub, like any command, it means it necessitates like any order necessitates an obligation, therefore this is an obligation, right? It becomes like a Frankenstein kind of like, you know, stamping different rulings on different things. Because it's not enough to study that, you also need to have a breadth of exposure to the Sunnah, right? You need to have a breadth of exposure to the Quran in order to understand like the context of what many of those rulings are. No, I'm saying you'll find general trends, right? There's no doubt about that. But in order for me to see that general trend, what do I need to do? I need to spend a lot of time like reading through them, right? And I have to be very familiar with the prophetic language, right? Which is what the Muḥaddithīn did. I have to be very familiar with the context. How do I get the context from them? By looking at the chapter headings, right? So those will give me insight into why the different scholars have used that. A very common one. So, and I don't want to get into the issue, but many people use there's a hadith in Bukhari where people will say, yastahillun, right? Like they made permissible music, right? They made permissible music, and they say, look, this is a proof that music is haram. Why is that a problem? Can I use it or no? I'm sorry? Because the chapter is about drinking. The Imam Bukhari, he used the hadith to say the prohibition of drinking alcohol. He doesn't use it as a prohibition of what? Of music, right? So and again, I'm not here to talk about the issue of music. I'm just trying to make a point. It's very important for us to understand there's a contextual understanding to all of these hadith. It's not enough for me. I can't just open up a Bukhari. You know, like I remember Imam Suhaib, he gave like a really nice example that I enjoy using. He said opening like a lay Muslim, opening up Bukhari or Muslim is like giving a 17-year-old a Bugatti. You know what I mean? Like he's going to run it into a tree. And it's the same thing. Like if I start just extracting rulings left and right, what am I going to start doing? Basically, I'm going to take these very superficially and I'm going to start applying them on people. And unfortunately, it gives me a sense of superiority, just like when I get into the Bugatti, right? And it's unfortunate, like, you know, and I think that initial love and zeal and drive to want to follow the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, I think is wonderful. You know, I think it's great. And I really do appreciate that. But at the end of the day, this is not how they were meant to be used. This is not how they were meant to be understood. You know, and even if we look at the prophetic lifestyle, and if we look at him sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you don't find him going, like, even if, like, it's just amazing, like, how some people who look at these hadith so superficially, they'll read all of these hadith, and they'll miss the message that the Prophet ﷺ didn't go around, like, shooting people down. Right? That the message is somehow lost. And that he didn't go around and be like, okay, you know, you need to fix your pants, and your prayer is not accepted, and your hijab isn't proper, and, like, you know, your beard's not long enough. So that's like, you know, I'm saying, but the thing is, if the Prophet ﷺ was like that, do I like anyone talking like that to me? No, right? None of us do. I don't mind somebody advising me. I look forward to someone advising me. Why? Because I want to improve. But am I going to improve and be like, brother, your prayer wasn't accepted? I'll be like, okay. Like, you know, it's like these things actually turn people off and they turn people away. This is not from the khuluq, this is not from the manners of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, nor was it the intention behind these rulings. And it's very sad that people think there's like a cut and paste type approach to dealing with the ayat, or a cut and paste type approach dealing with the hadith of the Messenger ﷺ. And if I do want to do those things, you know where I will advise someone to do that? In his khuluq. Like, if you want to do that, okay, take his character. Like that stuff you should definitely 100% copy and paste. Like, don't get angry, smile at people, be happy, like, be kind, be generous. Like, these are things that we all should copy and paste and try to implement. But many times we'll ignore those hadith, we'll be harsh, we'll be stern, you know what I mean, because we feel like, okay, well, the truth is with me. And that's, again, my feelings don't justify my actions. Just because I feel happy, or I feel zealous, or I feel I'm right, this does not justify how I can act and how I can deal with others. So investigating precision, how is this done? There are different methods to this. So if I find that an individual is changing the wording purpose, like changing the wording of the hadith on purpose, what do I do? Right, this is a problem. Right, this is a huge issue. This is basically fabricating. So what they would do, what the Muḥaddithīn would do, is they would actually go to a narrator and they would change the wording on purpose. They would go, so the scholar of hadith, they would go to a narrator and they'd be like, I heard this, and it's his hadith. It's his hadith. To test him. Right, they would go to test him. So they would purposely, they would mix up a word, or they would switch a narrator. And why are they doing it? Because they want to test him and to see if his memory is still sharp. They would revisit and ask to narrate again. So basically they would go, they would take a narration, a couple of years later they would come back. And they'd be like, you know, Shaykh, can you narrate the hadith to me again? And if it's the same, they'll trust it. Looking at his recorded narrations, meaning that if he has a book and he's narrating, what would they do? They would go back to his book. They would go back to his book to see if it matches up. They would compare to his recorded narrations. So some scholars, what they would do is they would actually narrate from their books. So what they would do is they would actually compare the scribal notes to see that they match up. Another thing that they would do is they would compare to his sheikh's recorded narrations. And they wouldn't stop there. You know where else they would go? Sometimes they would go to the sheikh's recorded narrations. In order to make sure what? That there's consistency down the line. Right? These are all different methods for them to actually test. Studying the hadith of the narrator. So this is the best way, hands down. Right? So if I want to find out about a narrator, what would I do? I would study all of his hadith. By studying all of his hadith, it gives me a complete picture, a 360 image of this narrator, of his narrations, of his strengths, of his weaknesses, of everything that he has done. But it's also the most what? Challenging, right? It's the most time consuming, it's the most challenging, like going back and finding this person in every single narration. So like we said, this is the most important and precise method if I want to go look at an individual's dhabt. What are some ways that a narrator's hadith are investigated? We said in general there are two ways. We would look at this individual's, if he only has lone narrations, then we would look at them, and the narrations in which he shares branch point with other narrations. So sometimes you have a hadith that are like, they're very jumbled, right? But there'll be one meeting point. At that meeting point, that hadith would be studied. And they would look then at the consistencies between the students that are narrating those hadith. And they would see if this narrator's narration matches with other students. And these lone narrations, this is both the easiest and the most difficult way of kind of like dealing with the narrator. And we'll talk about why. So if most of his narrations are lone reports, does that make it easier or more difficult? It's actually a proof of his weakness. Right? So if I have this narrator, I don't know a lot about him, and I see that he's narrating all these reports that other people aren't narrating, Is that not strange? Right? It's like an immediate red flag. It's like, so you're telling me like all of these other major narrators, these other major scholars, they missed it and you got it, right? You know, is it possible? Yeah, but the likelihood is very low. So there are some important notes here, obviously. So his individual and shared reports need to be studied to help come out with a fair view of how to grade his precision. It's also important to note that these individual reports, they are going to reflect on his memory and his position, how unique or odd his reports are. So a person might have a unique report, but if it falls under the general guidelines of the Sharia, is it something that strengthens his case or weakens it? Right? It's something that's going to strengthen his case, because it's like, okay, well, there's no violation that seems to be happening here. It seems to fall within the Shari'i goals. It falls within the maqasid of the Sharia. This warrants more exploration. The tabaqa. So if I have someone with a lone report, the further I get down the chain, right? The further I get down the chain, the more or less likely I am to accept that lone report, right? The less likely it gets, because really, like you got through 7 generations and nobody else heard this hadith, except you and your mashayikh, right? So again, it's a huge red flag, right? It's a huge red flag, and it definitely shows a problem in that hadith. So we also have to look at the relationship of the narrator and who he is narrating from. So is this person a long-term student, right? Did he study with him for a number of years? The level of the student himself, right? So sometimes a weak student will have a very strong teacher, but that doesn't necessarily strengthen who he is. But because if I have 2 students and one is his top student and one is a weak student, whose narrations am I most likely to accept? The strong one. Are some of his narrations highly contested or rejected? This is something else that will help me judge this person's narrations or not. There's also a relationship between the levels of mistakes and his trustworthiness. So we said that if an individual makes a lot of mistakes, like he just completely messes up words, is it now an issue of his precision? I want you guys to think about that. Is it just a memory thing that we're talking about now? Or is there another problem that's going on? Right, there's some other problem, right? There's some mental health issue that's going on with this person, right? This person has he has the inability to differentiate between what? Reality and fiction, right? And where did we touch on this? In what subject? Huh? With kids, yes, right? But the larger discussion was around what? Related to sanity. But what was the larger discussion?
Conditions
of trustworthiness, right? So now it's not an issue of his precision. It's actually a condition. It's actually a discussion of his. Can I really trust this person? Right? That he doesn't even know what he's saying, right? He's just saying things. So at that point, it becomes an issue of his trustworthiness. So if the level of mistakes is not something that directly affects his trustworthiness, like, is it possible that an individual makes 1 or 2 or 3 or even 10 mistakes in his narration? Yeah, right. He's human, right? So it's very possible that these individuals make these mistakes. Are those mistakes enough for me to reject his narrations? No. As in general, no. Can I reject an individual narration? Yeah, but that's possible. But his narrations as a whole, there's no reason for me to reject them. So if it's something that he's just constantly making mistakes and fumbling, at that point we would actually doubt his trustworthiness and most likely reject his hadith. And this works like in a very specific situation. This can only work if he has a lot of narrations. Because if he only has a few, what happens? You can't tell, right? You don't have enough narrations. Like, there's nothing for me to gauge on. Right, there's nothing for me to compare to. So if I have nothing to compare to, and someone was like, oh, he has like really weak memory, I'd be like, bro, he has 3 hadith. Like, there's no, I don't have enough hadith here to actually gauge his memory. Or he only has like 2, or he has like a dozen hadith. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this person has 5 hadith. So can I be like, there's nothing for me to gauge his actual precision in those situations. So if they're corroborable, meaning that if I can find other supporting narrations, then making a ruling is actually pretty easy on the hadith, right? At that point, we can say that if they're all not shadda, but if they're all tafarrudat, right? If they're all individual reports, if some are corroborable, or if he just has a single lone narration, aren't these just impossible situations? Right? There's no means for me to there's nothing for me to compare to. How do I even judge this narrator's narrations? It's actually still possible. And even though Ibn Adi, he says concerning Silm al-Alawi, he has very few hadith, the extent of which I have found is 5. Meaning that I looked for this guy's hadith and all I found were 5 narrations. Or a few more. With this amount, I cannot gauge if his hadith are accepted or weak. Because he just doesn't what? He doesn't have enough. And they're not enough to even gauge if he is munkar. What is Ibn Adi basically saying here? He's saying, what ruling is he putting? Did he put one on the narrator? No. Why? He doesn't have enough information. So he's like, I don't have enough information, therefore I'm not going to what? I'm not going to reject or accept. I'm going to stop, right? Until what? Until I get more information, right? If I get more information, then I can make a ruling. But this only happens in this case, right? So what do we do in these situations? It's still possible. It's still possible to make a ruling. So the hadith critics actually do it. Yes?
That book, Al-Kamil, is that
yeah.
famous Tarikh al-Kamil?
لا الكامل في الضعفاء.
Al-Kamil.
Yeah. الكامل في التاريخ is Ibn Asakir.
Yeah, Ibn Asakir.
So the hadith critics actually did it. So even if they had somebody who's considered muqil, or who had a few narrations, they actually made rulings on their narrations. Secondly, Ibn Adi, he says in other places it's possible. So even though over here, meaning that it was not possible with what? With that specific narrator. He couldn't come to a conclusion. But this doesn't mean that he couldn't and he wasn't able to come to conclusions with other muqillin, yani those who narrated a few hadith. And lastly, Al-Khatib, he also mentions it's possible. So you have many major muhaddithīn, many major scholars of hadith who say, even if you have just these handful of narrations, it's completely fine. It's still enough information for us to actually make a ruling. So how do later scholars do this? Earlier scholars, they had all these tools, right? They can go back, they can test, they can talk to the person, they can change up the hadith to see where he's at. Later scholars, what do? All those tools are gone, right? Can I go back and I'd be like, okay, hey, you narrated this hadith, can you narrate it to me again? Can I do that now? Right, why can't I do that? Because they're all dead, right? Like, Allah yarhamuhum, right? So they're all dead, so what can I do? Like today, as a researcher, yes? Okay, so where would I do that? Where would I look? Because today, we said, all the people who narrated hadith are what? They're all dead. Right, they're all dead, they're all gone. So now, I'm stuck with what? I just got books, right? So I have books in front of me, and those books, they talk about narrators. And I can now use that information to help me gauge those narrators. But those extra tools that I had, right, when it was actively narrating, all those tools are gone. So what do we do? So there are some ways, the same way that we seek adala. How do I do that? By going through the books of Rijal. So Imam Bukhari said he is saduq. Imam Bukhari said he is trustworthy. Imam Muslim said he's matruk, right? So I have these sets of rulings from different scholars on all of these different narrators that help me determine and gauge these particular narrators. So for example, if a person is well known to be a strong memorizer, do I need to do a lot of research? No, right? There's no reason for me to investigate further. Why? Because it's well known. Or there are clear narrations about his status. So if I have Imam Bukhari says, "Kana hafidhun mutqin," like he was a great, precise imam. Do I need to be like, well, you know what? What did he mean by hafidh? Like, what do I mean by precise? I don't need to explore those things because it's a very clear text telling me exactly what Imam Bukhari felt about this narrator. Inferred trustworthiness. And what does this mean? So for example, if I don't have information about a particular narrator, but I find him in the four major works of Sunan. So I find his narrations in Abu Dawud and in Tirmidhi and in Nasa'i and Ibn Majah. And I find that all of those narrations, the Muḥaddithīn, the scholars of Hadith, they're using that Hadith. But I can't find a ruling on this narrator. Right, so now I'd be like, it's giving me more what?
Confidence.
Right, it's giving me more confidence in that narrator. Because I'd be like, okay, I don't have information about him in other books, but the fact that these big imams are using him, and not only are they using him, they're using him in a way that agrees with the chapter. So that is telling me that they trusted this hadith, and therefore there's a good chance that this narrator is trustworthy. But we also have to understand, do I have, this is essentially the problem. Do I have access to this narrator's entire hadith encyclopedia? No. Why? We said what happened? We said that we haven't lost hadith, meaning all the statements and rulings of the Prophet ﷺ have reached us, but what have we lost? We've lost chains. Right? We no longer have chains, right? So when Imam Ahmad, he says like, I've memorized 100,000 hadith, like I've memorized 1,000,000 hadith. When you have Imam Bukhari said, I hafidh 400,000 hadith. You have Imam Muslim said, I hafidh 300,000 hadith, like I memorized 400,000, 300. What happened to all these chains? They're gone. Why? Because they didn't need them anymore. They had enough information to take the best of what they found and do what? Put it in their books. And once it was in their books, they didn't have a need for the rest of the chains. Right? And so we have chains, but the number of chains we have now are significantly less than they had. So our ability to compare has been impaired. Like we don't have that full ability, which is why we can't make the same concrete rulings on hadith that those scholars did. So when Imam Bukhari says a hadith is sahih, he means what? He means it's sahih, right? He means it's sahih. I can make a ruling on a chain because I'm working with the information that I have, right? So the scope they had was here, and the scope I have is here. But that scope is enough for me to actually make a ruling on individual chains. So let's say I have two scenarios. If I have an unknown narrator, and I find that in this chain of narration, I have somebody who's thiqa, trustworthy, unknown narrator, right? He's an unknown, majhul narrator. And then he's narrating a hadith, and this hadith is rejected. It's a clearly rejected hadith. It's going against one of the principles in the Sharia. What can I assume about this unknown narrator?
That anything from him is not
Right? So where is the problem in this chain? The unknown narrator. And how can I say that with confidence? All the other ones were what? All the other ones were trustworthy. So if I have 1, 2, 3, 4 trustworthy narrators, then I have this unknown narrator, and then I have this text that's rejected, that will tell me something about that narrator, that he is also what? Right, it's possible. Right, it's possible. But at the best case scenario, he is what? He's weak. Right? He's weak. Yeah, and what are some resources? So basically, these type of narrators, they are investigated in these books, right? So these books are very important. The first one, Mizan al-I'tidal by Imam al-Dhahabi. Dhahabi died 748, right? So it is a relatively late work, but by this time you had his Hijri, yeah. So his father-in-law, I don't know if you guys probably don't know, but his father-in-law was Mizzi. Imam Mizzi, he wrote probably one of the most comprehensive books on the six books of hadith. That's called Tahdhib al-Kamal. Tahdhib al-Kamal. Yeah.
not Tahzib al-Ahkam.
So there are three basic resources. You have Mizan al-I'tidal, and then later on you have Lisan al-Mizan. Basically what Ibn Hajar does is he expands on that work. He comes about 100 years later. And then this is actually my Sheikh, Sheikh Hatim al-Awni. He has Dhayl al-Lisan, where he expands on some of the work that Ibn Hajar does. And then secondly, a narrator who narrates a few hadith and is known to have a few hadith. So like the narrator Ibn Adi mentioned, he said that this person only narrates 5 hadith. And we have other scholars who'll be like, oh, this person only narrates 12 hadith. And they actually list the number of hadith that are narrated. He says that these hadith are then studied, and if they're found to be in line and upright and sound and found in major books of hadith, then this gives me what? Confidence to accept those hadith. So these are basically the two major scenarios behind that. One is that it's very clear that the hadith is rejected, and the other scenario is very clear that the hadith is accepted. All right, we'll stop here inshallah, and then we will continue inshallah after Ramadan. But don't worry, I'll come back to this discussion because I know we'll probably all forget by the time we come back. But jazakumullah khair. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khairi khalqi nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.